You've been praying for healing, standing, declaring, believing, doing everything you know to do, applying everything you've been hearing in teachings, but you still haven't seen a manifestation. Now what? We're going to be talking about that question today on Charis Daily. You've done everything you know to do. You've said all the right confessions, you've believed, you've prayed, and in a sense, you've almost become introspective, thinking, what have I not done? What should I do more of or less of? And I can already start by telling you, becoming introspective is not the way to receive your healing. You've got to look to Him, look to the healer, look to Jehovah Rapha, the one who paid for your healing, provided your healing. And if you're becoming introspective and looking at you and wondering, what have I done or not done? What should I be doing more of or less of? It's because you believe that the healing is about you and what you're doing right or what you're not doing right. There's a lot of people that believe, man, if I just confess everything just right. Did you know that you're going to confess some things that maybe you're not going to confess it just right? Like, oh, I have to say the name of the disease just right, or what? Man, I've already learned, by the way, if the doctor diagnoses me with something, if it's something I can't pronounce, I don't receive it. But think about it. There's people that say, oh, I've got to confess. And yes, don't get me wrong. Life and death is in the power of the tongue. That goes without saying. That's the absolute truth. But it's not like there's a formula or there's some special thing that you have to say to make it happen. You could confess it wrong, but still have, let me give you an example before I make this point. Biblically, in Joshua, I believe it's chapter 10, where the children of Israel are in a battle, and Joshua wants to see the victory be total and complete. He doesn't want to just let the sun go down or let time run out, like in a football game, just let the clock run out. I'm talking about American football for you international viewers. But if you just kind of, well, we're winning anyway, let's let the clock run out. No, Joshua wanted to see a full, complete victory. And so he said, let's extend this day so that we can make our victory complete. Let's go for the 100-fold. Why stop at 30 or 60? And so Joshua commanded the sun to stand still and said, sun, stand still. Now, what's the problem with what Joshua commanded? The sun wasn't moving. The earth was moving. But guess what? When Joshua commanded it, it worked. So my point is, you don't have to have all the science and understanding to be able to confess just the right thing, but you've been doing everything. What should I do more of? Remember in the book of Job, everyone's favorite book, being sarcastic, I actually do like the book of Job. I've seen a lot of great depth of revelation. But anyway, in the book of Job, Job spends the bulk of that book, most of the chapters, griping and complaining and wondering, did I do something wrong? What did I not do? But he becomes introspective. And at the end of the book, I really love, this is powerful. I'm trying to stay on track, but I think there's people watching that need to hear what I'm about to say. I love how at the end of the book of Job, he's been introspective the entire book. It's 42 chapters, and he's complaining just about all the way up to chapter 33 or so, whenever Elihu starts talking, and then God starts talking in Job 38. But Job spends the bulk of that book griping and complaining and being introspective and wondering, should I be doing something different? Did I do something wrong? And making it about himself. You're not in a place of receptivity if you're making it about yourself. What should I be doing more of, or what should I be doing less of? And so what happened with Job? Well, in Job 42, and now I do know that Job was not a covenant man. This is Old Testament. We're in the New Covenant, and you say, well, how applicable is what you're telling me? Well, I'm going to draw out a principle that I believe is very applicable for New Covenant believers. That in Job chapter 42 and in verse 10, the Bible says that God had, up prior to verse 10, God instructed Job to pray for his 3 friends. Now, if I'm Job, I'm probably thinking, I'm not really in a state to pray for other people right now. I'm not feeling good. I'm frustrated. I've experienced loss. And I just don't feel like praying for people right now. But he's had his encounter with God. And so he's taken back by the greatness of God. And so Job decides he obeys the Lord. And God says, pray for these 3 friends of yours. And the Bible says in Job 42, verse 10, that God restored Job's losses when he prayed for his 3 friends. Now think about what I'm telling you. God restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Why? Job was in a place of receptivity when he took his eyes off of himself and began to minister to other people. I want to encourage you, if you've been sitting around waiting, when is it going to happen? When am I going to see the manifestation? Should I be doing more of something, less of something? Get your eyes off of you. Now, I know that may not sound very compassionate, but I'm trying to help you find that solution. Get your eyes off of you. Quit making it about you, what you should do more of and do less of. And when you start ministering to other people, and you determine, I'm going to go out and minister to someone today, well, a couple of things happen. First of all, you're taking your eyes off of yourself, but then you also, by default, you've got to align with the Lord and with His Spirit to be able to minister to other people. And that puts you in a greater place of receptivity, even for yourself, because now you're aligned with the Lord, the giver, and your eyes are off of yourself. God's getting it through you, and at the same time, He's getting it to you. So I would challenge you, when I've just been praying and standing and praying and standing and fasting and declaring and speaking, and now what? Well, how about this? Stop looking at yourself. Stop wondering when it's going to happen, and go minister to someone. Go lay hands on someone. You're like, well, I'm not really in a state to do that. Well, Job wasn't either. But he, in his state of loss and pain, laid hands on his friends. And while, Job 42, verse 10, remember those words, while he was praying for his friends, it was at that moment that the Lord restored Job's losses. I remember years ago, we had in our house in Atlanta, Georgia, we had a garage door. And of course, the garage doors with the two sensors, and it wasn't working one day. And so I'm not a handyman, but I decided I'm going to fix this. And so I did what every good man would do. I got on YouTube and I tried to find, well, how does this work? And looked up, I guess, whatever Genie or whatever garage door we had. Well, I learned a lot about garage doors in the process. Didn't fix anything. But I was trying to see if there was something obstructing the signal. But it turns out I learned that there is a sender, a giver, so to speak, of the signal, and then the receiver. And of course, if there's anything obstructing that signal, then for safety, the garage door will not shut. But there's also, if there's any type of misalignment, the garage door won't shut. And so what I tried to do is I figured, well, there must be a misalignment. And there was. I wasn't able to make it work. I had to call my friend who fixed garage doors, and a friend of mine from Ukraine. He's a good buddy of mine. He came over. He fixed it. But I tried everything. I got down on the floor, got behind the little sensor. I'm trying to look with my eyes and look to see if I can measure, where is this misalignment? And I was so frustrated. Never did fix it. And again, my buddy did, but I'm just looking and trying everything I can, laying on the floor in my garage, the nasty cold floor of my garage, trying to figure out if I can align. And my thought was, where is the misalignment? Well, turns out there was a misalignment. And the sender, there's the sender and the receiver. The sender wasn't the problem. The receiver was, because the receiver wasn't lined up with the sender. But I couldn't perceive the misalignment, and I never could make it work. Can I just tell you, and I'm going to kind of build this illustration, but let me tell you in James, so if we go to James chapter 1, and it says in verse 5, if you lack wisdom, and this could be applied to you're believing for healing, and you're not seeing the manifestation, Lord, I need wisdom in this area. James 1, verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given. Now in verse 5, it's very clear, God gives. And so the problem is not with the giver. The giver's giving. He's doing his job. But if there's a misalignment, it's like if you go to a soda fountain and you've got different soft drinks and you put your cup under one but push the dispenser for the other, well, it's a misalignment. And the liquid's coming out, the soft drink's coming out, but it's not going into your cup because there's a misalignment. Well, the giver's giving. The problem is he's not withholding from you. And it says he gives liberally, so freely, he's pouring it out lavishly, and without reproach. That means he's not shaming you in the process, that you really should have known this already. No, he's not giving with reproach. So the problem is not with the giver, but there is a misalignment. And then it goes into the next verse, and it says, but let him ask in faith, verse 6, with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. Verse 7, for let not that man suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. Verse 8, he's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Now back to verse 7, let not that man suppose he'll receive. But the reason you're not receiving is not the fault of the giver. Because in context, if you go back to verse 5, remember, if you take a text out of context, you're left with a con. And if you ignore verse 5 is essential to understand. The giver's giving. He gives liberally and without reproach. So he's doing his part. If you're not receiving, it's not because God's not withholding, it's because there's a misalignment. So in my garage door, I was frustrated because I couldn't perceive. I'm thinking, where is the misalignment? I mean, it was just frustration. Tried everything. Finally, I called my buddy and just had to swallow my pride and admit, I can't fix this. And he fixed it. And it was a misalignment, but he used his tools. There are tools for fixing those misalignments. Well, see, here's the point. If you're not receiving from God, God's not at fault. The giver's giving. The problem is there's a misalignment. You say, well, how do I fix the misalignment? Well, here's how you fix the misalignment. Get your eyes off of yourself and do what Job did in Job 42. And again, it's the book of Job. People seem to be a little skittish about the book of Job. But these are principles that hold true even in the new covenant. The Job 42, verse 10, the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. So I'm encouraging you. I've been doing everything I can. I've been praying. I've been believing. I'm not seeing the manifestation. What do I do now? Get your eyes off of you and go minister to someone else. Yeah, but not until I receive my own. And that's not true. When he's ministering it through you, he'll be ministering it to you. But by ministering to someone else, two things are happening. Your eyes are coming off of yourself, and you're having to align with the giver for the sake of someone else. Well, when you're aligned with the giver, it puts you in a place of receptivity, and those are the tools for fixing the misalignment that you perceived but couldn't fix. And that is how you receive what you were struggling to receive from the Lord. When Elijah was in his cave, and I'm going to shift this a little bit to talk about Elijah, draw out some principles from Elijah, talking about when you don't see the manifestation. So very quickly, and there's so much more we could cover that I don't have time just in this episode, but this will jumpstart you and maybe get you on the right track for if you haven't been seeing the manifestation of what you're believing for. So let's think about Elijah. Elijah goes into his cave of self-centeredness. This was in 1 Kings 19. And I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but in 1 Kings 19, Elijah he found himself in a very introspective, self-centered place. And while he's in the cave, the Lord says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah starts griping and complaining, and everyone's trying to kill me. They've killed all the prophets of the Lord, and I alone am left, and they're seeking to take my life. And basically Elijah's saying, I've done everything I was supposed to do, and things aren't working. Now think about this, because even though the story I'm telling you about Elijah isn't really in the context of healing, there's a principle that still applies, and it'll speak to where you are. If you've been in that place of, I've been doing everything I've been doing everything I know to do, and it just doesn't seem to be working. And so here's Elijah explaining to God, I've been faithful, I've been zealous for you, I've done everything you asked, I've done all these exploits, and everyone, I'm alone. I'm the last one. I alone am left. I'm the last man standing, which isn't true. The enemy will like to make you feel isolated and alone, but Elijah had other prophets around him who had not bowed the knee to Baal. And here's Elijah just griping, and he said, and now they're seeking to take my life, and nothing's working, completely self-centered, completely introspective. So God asked him again, what are you doing here, Elijah? Here's a clue for you. If you answer God's question, if God asks you a question, you give an answer, he asks you again, it's probably because you didn't answer right the first time. God asks him again, what are you doing here, Elijah? So Elijah gives this whole dissertation about what's wrong, and I've been doing everything I know to do. I've been faithful to you. I've been zealous, and nothing's working. And you know the solution God gave him? If you read the story in 1 Kings 19, we're not going to go through it together, but you can do it on your own. The solution God gave him was, get up, go anoint Hazael as king over Syria, go anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and go anoint Elisha as prophet in your place. You know what? In a sense, what God's telling him is, go minister to other people. And here's Elijah thinking, God, you don't get it. I'm over it. I don't want to minister anymore. I want to die. I'm no better than my fathers. Let me die. I'm finished. I'm ready to throw in the towel. It's not working out. It's just not happening the way I want it to happen. Elijah's very self-centered here. Crisis of faith. And God tells him, it doesn't sound compassionate, but God knows this is the answer. Why? Because there's only one way out of the cave of self-centeredness. And that's not to go in deeper and become more introspective, and I'm doing everything I know to do and it's not working out. The only way out of the cave of self-centeredness is to go minister to other people, and that will fix the misalignment between the giver and the receiver. That will fix the alignment issues in your heart. And so God says, I want you to leave this cave. I want you to go anoint Jehu as king over Israel. I want you to go anoint Hazael as king over Syria, and I want you to anoint Elisha as prophet in your place and begin to train and mentor him. And so God was, in a sense, getting Elijah's eyes off of himself. And guess what? Elijah was no stranger to this idea of praying for things and not seeing the immediate manifestation. Let me give you an example. In 1 Kings 17, he was at Zarephath. And now this is a matter of healing, where at Zarephath, the widow's son, where he was staying, the son died. And so the widow at Zarephath brought her dead son to the prophet Elijah and said, have you come here to remind me of my sins and kill my son? And so Elijah went before the Lord, and this is 1 Kings 17, and I want you to see that when Elijah prayed here, the manifestation did not happen the first time or the second time. And this is for Elijah. Okay? Now, again, we're drawing some points from Elijah. There's so much you could cover from the life of Elijah, but we're talking about what do you do when you're not seeing the manifestation? And so Elijah takes the widow's son, goes before the Lord in 1 Kings 17. And I'll just start in verse 17. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. And his sickness was so serious. Now, sometimes the Bible's comical. Listen to how this is worded in the New King James rendering here. It says, it happened after these things, the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. His sickness was so serious that there was no more breath left in him. Think about that. It's like, hey, the sickness is pretty serious. How serious is it? Well, there's no breath in him. Well, that's just kind of easing onto you to tell you that, hey, he's dead. He has expired. It's over. Okay? So imagine, how serious is your sickness? Well, it's pretty serious. There's no breath. Well, that's pretty serious. And so the child's brought to Elijah, and in verse 18, so she said to Elijah, what have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son? And he said to her, give me your son. So he took him out of her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, laid him on his own bed, and then he cried out to the Lord and said, O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodge by killing her son? Now let me just make a statement here by what Elijah prayed here in verse 20. God did not kill the widow's son. And if God had have killed the widow's son, it would have been futile for Elijah to pray for a resurrection, because God's not going to kill someone and then allow you to speak life back into that person. That's just nonsensical. So God did not kill the widow's son, and this would not be a good understanding of God's nature. And yet this is how Elijah prayed, and we could easily say that this was not really a perfect prayer. That's the point I'm trying to make. When Elijah prayed for the widow's son, it wasn't a perfect prayer. It wasn't even really a very good faith prayer. That's really not, if you're trying to pray a prayer of faith, the Bible says the prayer of faith shall save the sick. Well, if you pray that way and say, Lord, did you kill this person? Is this your doings? That's not really a prayer of faith. But man, thank God for his grace and mercy that he meets us where we are. And I want to encourage you, even if you've been praying in a way that is not really a good prayer of faith, God can meet you where you are and bring you to the finish line and see the full manifestation. So here's Elijah praying. It's not even really a good prayer, but he went to the right place. And you could see this throughout the Bible. David, there was a lot of times David prayed. It wasn't really a good prayer, but he went to the right place. You just pour out your heart to God. Even if it comes out in a way that, wow, that's not really faith. That's not really good doctrine. But you went to the right place. And now your eyes are on him, and he's going to show you how to get to the finish line. So Elijah says, did you do this, Lord? Did you kill this woman's son? In verse 20. And in verse 21, he stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord, my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him." Now, I think verse 21 is evidence that Elijah didn't really believe that God had killed the widow's son. Even though he said that statement in the prayer, I think it was out of frustration. at the circumstances. But in verse 21, he prayed for the child's soul to come back into the child. He wouldn't have prayed that if he'd believed that God was the one that killed the child. Anyway, let's continue reading. So he prayed that, let this child's soul come back to him. Verse 22, then the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came back to him, and he revived. Verse 23, and Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house, gave him to his mother, and Elijah said, see, your son lives. Now, that's a great outcome, but I want you to go back to verse 21. And verse 21 gives us a key detail that I don't want you to miss. He stretched himself out on the child 3 times. You know what that means? That means he did not see the result the first time. He did not see the result the second time. Now, what if he'd given up the first time? I think it's very likely that that child may not have revived. What about the second time? Now, I don't like to read the Bible with speculation, but what if he had given up the first time? What if he had given up the second time? But 3 times, that means Elijah was going to keep going until he saw the result. See, another reason that we're not seeing the manifestation many times is because we just give up too soon. Now, let's say, well, I've been prayed over 10 times. I've already done this. It's been a whole month and I've been standing and declaring. Well, I believe that it doesn't, some people experience sort of a progressive manifestation. Others experience right instantaneously. But here's the point. A lot of times it has to do with where our faith is. But don't give up too soon. Elijah prays the first time, doesn't see the result. Second time, doesn't see the result. But it happened in the third time. And a very similar thing happened in 1 Kings 18, where God had told Elijah that the drought was about to end. There'd been a period of drought for Israel. The drought was about to end. And so Elijah goes up to pray. I'm going to take you to this, and we're still talking about Elijah, 1 Kings chapter 18. And in verse 19, this is at the end of the drought. It says, actually, that's not the right reference, excuse me. 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 41. That's where I want to take you. And in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 41, as the drought's coming to an end, it says, then Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of an abundance of rain. So he's been prophesying here the end of the drought. In verse 42, so Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. Then he bowed down on the ground, put his face between his knees. Now, where was Elijah's face? Between his knees, in prayer. But in verse 43, he said to his servant, go up now, look toward the sea. So he went up and looked and said, there's nothing. And 7 times, keep this in mind, 7 times he said, go again. And verse 44, then it came to pass the 7th time that he said, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand rising up out of the sea. So he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot, go down before the rain stops you. And now it happened in the meantime that the sky became black with clouds and wind. There was a heavy rain. Now, let me show you here the story of what happened, that Elijah is kneeling on the ground with his head between his knees, and he's telling his servant, I want you to go out, check the sky. Do you see any clouds? Servant comes back. I see nothing. Elijah says, go again, check again, look up again. Servant comes back the second time. I see nothing. Third time, check again. Because Elijah knew God has said, if God said it, it's going to happen. God said the drought was going to end, but I don't see any clouds to give evidence that it's going to rain. But if God said it's going to happen, well, then it's going to happen. So he sends his servant, check. Do you see anything? I see nothing. Elijah sends his servant again. Go check again. Do you see anything? I don't see anything. Now, what if Elijah had given up the 5th time or the 6th time? I can't speculate as to what would have happened. I believe that the drought would have ended. But Elijah just said, keep checking. Now, he sent his servant to check, but Elijah himself was not looking at the sky. This is a big deal. Elijah was not looking at the sky to check for himself. He kept his head buried between his knees so that he could keep his eyes on the Lord. He wasn't going out to check. Has anything changed? Has anything changed? Has anything changed? He sent his servant. It's okay to check. It's okay to ask. But he let his servant do that job while he kept his eyes on the Lord. Now, if I'm Elijah and I'm getting a little antsy and a little anxious, I'll go check myself. Are you sure you don't see any clouds? Let me come check myself. That kind of looks like could be the start of the formation of a little cloud. I think it's going to rain. I told the king it was going to rain. It better rain. Lord, where's the rain? No. Elijah didn't even look. Let the servant look. I'm going to stay in prayer, keep my eyes on the Lord. I'm not the one checking. What's my point? You've been believing for healing. It's okay if you let the doctor check and say, hey, any change? Well, I know it's going to change because God promised, by his stripes I'm healed. So while you check, I'm going to keep my face buried between my knees so I can look at the Lord. I'm not the one looking at test results. I'm not the one checking to say, has anything changed? I'm not antsy and anxious for the manifestation. I'm looking at the one who promised, at the healer. I'm keeping my eyes on him, while the doctor can check if he wants to, like Elijah's servant, you go check. And then, well, there is the cloud the size of a man's hand, not exactly enough to finish a drought. Good enough for me. That's the start of what God promised. You see just a little bit. Well, it looks like your blood cells might be showing a little improvement. Hey, cloud the size of a man's hand, not necessarily torrential rain, but it's the start of what God promised me. Man, take hope. And if you haven't seen a manifestation yet, you've been praying, get your eyes off of you, get your eyes on him. So the first point I made was take your eyes off of you. Sometimes the best way to do that is go minister to other people. The second point I'm making, though, is quit looking at test results. Quit looking for evidence of change. Look to the giver. Align your heart as the receiver with the one who made the promise and the one who gives liberally and without reproach. Keep looking at him. Align your heart with his. Don't look at the sky to see, are there any clouds yet? Has anything changed yet? See, in Luke 17, there's the story of lepers, 10 lepers that Jesus cleansed. And he said, go show yourself to the priest. When you go show yourself to the priest, you're making a statement, I believe I'm cleansed from my leprosy. Well, Jesus told them to do it in faith because there was no evidence yet that they'd been healed. But while they were on their way, acting as a whole person would act, the manifestation happened. We put too much stock in the manifestation. You just believe what he spoke. Look at him. Let someone else check the sky for you. Go minister to other people in the process. The manifestation will happen. I love you, and I believe you're going to see the fullness, the 100-fold of what God promised you. Man, I remember teaching this in India. Someone watching me teach this on television in another church had been home bedridden. She couldn't go to church. Pastor's daughter felt condemned. Couldn't go to church bedridden because for a long time because of sickness. She heard me teach this on live stream, decided I'm going to go show myself to the priest. She got up, went to church, on the way got healed. I'm telling you, you don't have to wait for the manifestation. Start moving forward. The healing is already yours. The victory is already yours. And we're running out of time. So I'd love to keep going, but you can keep going. Take what we've said, run with it. I want to encourage you, if you need any prayer, we've got a great prayer call center. You can reach out to us, 719-635-1111. That number is at the bottom of your screen. Please reach out. Look online at charisdailygtn.com. And you'll find there our free offer, a current free offer. If you're watching on video on demand, just go on the website and find out what the current free offer is. But at the time of the broadcast, it is a healing guide, a free healing guide that you can download and other resources from Charis Bible College that'll be an encouragement to you, continue to feed you and keep you strong and keep your eyes in the right place as you see the manifestation come. We're here on Charis Daily 7 days a week, and we want to invite you to stay with us. Let your heart be stirred, encouraged by the word. You are blessed, you're favored, you're loved, and I'll see you next time.